Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie In the Lost Lands, 2025, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. It begins in a place untouched by time. A jagged edge of the world where myth and ruin breathe the same air, and the sun dares not warm what fate has already forgotten. The wind carries whispers there, not of memory, but of prophecy. And somewhere in the heart of this vast, unforgiving wilderness walks a woman cloaked in shadow and scars. Her name is Grey Alice, and wherever she goes, stories bloom behind her like blood from a wound. This world is not ours. It's older, wilder, built from ancient bones and primal magic. The rules here are not bound by science or order, but by desire and consequence. It's a place where every choice extracts a price, where every wish is a curse in disguise. People trade secrets like currency and fear the very mountains they live beneath. And in that darkness, something stirs. When the film opens, we meet a desperate queen. Her realm is withering. Her armies fractured. Her legacy crumbling like the stone walls around her. But she's heard rumors, old ones, about a woman who can bend fate, who walks the lost paths between worlds and commands powers thought long extinct. It's said she can grant any wish, fulfill any desire, no matter the cost. So the queen summons her, and the woman comes, not for gold, not for glory, but for purpose. She asks only one thing in return, that the queen be sure. Because once the spell is cast, there can be no going back. From there, the story unfolds like a fire lit in a cold forest, slow, deliberate, and then all at once. The journey into the Lost Lands is not a path but a plunge. Grey Alice is joined by a warrior named Boyce, a reluctant companion with his own ghosts, tasked with guiding her through terrain where even the maps fear to tread. Together, they pass through villages where time sleeps in silence, across deserts that whisper your name in dreams, through caverns that weep when you lie, and into mountains carved with the regrets of forgotten kings. What they seek is not a place, but a truth. The queen's desire? To wield the magic of transformation. To become a dragon and gain the power to crush her enemies. But what seems like a simple transaction spirals quickly into something far more dangerous. Because Grey Alice doesn't merely grant wishes, she reveals the truth inside them. And truths, in this world, are monsters of their own. As the journey deepens, so too do the cracks in the queen's intent. Grey Alice begins to see the darkness not in the land, but in the hearts of those who would reshape it. Boyce, once silent and guarded, begins to question the nature of service, of loyalty, of what it means to follow a path when the one leading it might be dragging you toward ruin. And still, the land itself pushes back. The Lost Lands are not empty. They watch. They test. A river demands memory for passage. A forest traps your name in its leaves and erases it from your mind. An ancient spirit, long buried, rises to barter with Alice, not with threats, but with the voices of those she's lost. With temptation. With mercy. Every moment is a trial. Every step, a choice. And every choice shapes the magic that follows. The film unfolds like a myth retold by moonlight. It doesn't sprint toward action, but drips with dread and wonder. There are battles, yes, fierce, violent, otherworldly. But they're never just about strength. They're about what one is willing to sacrifice. Whether power is worth the pieces of soul you lose along the way. Grey Alice isn't a hero. She's something older than that. Something heavier. She's been hated, hunted, worshipped, and forgotten. And through it all, she remains unchanged. Until now. Because something in this quest unsettles her. Not just the queen's motives, but her own. For the first time, we see glimpses of the woman beneath the cloak. The mistakes. The grief. The hunger. And what begins as a tale of magic for hire becomes a slow reckoning, a confrontation not just with ancient forces, but with the self. There are moments in the film that hang in your memory like lanterns in fog. Alice standing at the edge of a cliff, her cloak snapping in the wind as she watches stars fall in reverse. Boyce finding a village that remembers him, but he remembers nothing in return. A mirror carved from obsidian that shows not reflections, but possible versions of yourself. A battle fought not with swords, but with memories screamed into the air like spells. And then, just when you think you've found your bearings, the twist lands. Because the Queen? She knew what she was asking for all along. She didn't want to become a dragon. She wanted to end dragons. She wanted to kill the myth itself. To burn down the old stories and write her own. She used Grey Alice not as a tool, but as a key. To open the gate to a realm that even the Lost Lands fear. A place where creation and destruction are one and the same. And now that the door is open, everything begins to change. The sky darkens. The land groans, and Alice realizes the one truth she's tried to forget, that magic doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to everyone. And when misused, it doesn't punish the guilty. It punishes the world. The final act is a descent into chaos and clarity. Alice must make a choice she's spent lifetimes avoiding. Boyce must confront the truth of who he is, and what he left behind. And the Queen? She gets her wish. Just not in the way she expected. Because power, in this story, is never clean. It's never fair. And it's never free. The ending doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives like a shadow at the end of a tunnel. Quiet. Final. And strangely, peaceful. Alice walks into the horizon, her steps slow, the air behind her rippling with magic that now refuses to be bound. Some might call it a tragedy. Others, a beginning. But what it is, undeniably, is a story that stays. A myth you carry like a secret. A whisper of a world that could have been. And if you listen closely, you might still hear it. In the wind. In the dark. In the lost places. Calling you home. The film doesn't begin with fire. It begins with silence. The kind of silence that blankets a forest before a storm. You feel it in the bones of the world, a quiet that holds its breath. And then, the voice of an old woman, layered with age and dust, begins to tell a tale. Not of heroes. Not of victories. But of a woman feared and sought, loved and reviled, who walks where no one dares go. The voice doesn't speak her name, not at first, but the way it speaks of her carries the weight of legend. From those first words, the story takes hold. We are taken to a dying kingdom. A castle that should have stood eternal, now cracked at its seams. Its halls echo with whispers, not of hope but of dread. The Queen, cloaked in velvet and pride, listens as her counselors bicker over dwindling food, retreating borders, and the slow crawl of rebellion. But she is not concerned with battles. Her war is older. She speaks of prophecy, of the old ways, of a power long buried in the forgotten corners of the world, and of one woman who might unlock it. The room falls still when she says the name. Grey Alice. They say she can grant any wish. For a price. And that price is never money. The Queen sends for her, not through messengers, but through a ritual older than the throne itself. A fire lit in a tower. A name whispered into ash. A mark burned into the earth. Days pass. Then weeks. The Queen begins to doubt. And then, without warning, she appears. Grey Alice doesn't ride a horse or announce herself. She walks. Cloaked in worn leathers, her face half hidden beneath a hood, her eyes like storm clouds that have seen too many winters. She speaks little, listens more. And when the Queen asks her if the stories are true, Alice replies with a single word. Yes. The Queen's request is simple, but her intent is not. She desires transformation, not for herself, but for her future. She speaks of dragons, of power incarnate, of burning the enemies of her kingdom to ash. She wants the might of beasts returned to her bloodline. The world is changing, she says, and she must become more than a ruler. She must become legend. Grey Alice asks, "Are you certain?" The Queen does not hesitate, so the journey begins. But Grey Alice doesn't travel alone. The Queen insists on sending a guide, someone who knows the terrain, who can guard her through the dead valleys and wind-split canyons of the Lost Lands. His name is Boyce, a former knight turned exile, with a face carved in quiet sorrow and hands that still remember the grip of a sword. He doesn't believe in magic, doesn't trust the Queen. But he takes the job because he has nothing else. Their first days together are marked by silence. Alice walks ahead, rarely speaking. Boyce follows, always watching. They pass through forests where the trees twist toward them like listeners, through plains where ruins rise like broken teeth from the earth. The land shifts beneath their feet, not physically, but in memory. Places change when they look away. Time slips. Night falls faster than it should. They come upon a village, nestled against the edge of a black river. At first, it seems abandoned. But as they step into the center square, the bells toll. Doors open. Faces emerge. And the villagers know her. They call her the Promise Maker. Some kneel. Others flee. One woman throws a stone at her feet and screams, "You brought back my husband, but he didn't come back right." Grey Alice doesn't flinch. Boyce doesn't ask. They rest for a night, but neither sleep. In the distance, wolves sing. Or perhaps something worse. And in the morning, the villagers are gone. All of them. The entire village. As if it folded itself into the fog and vanished. They move on. Each step takes them deeper into places no map records. A gorge filled with bones, where the wind sings lullabies in a forgotten tongue. A grove of stone pillars that bleed when touched. A lake so still it reflects not what is, but what could have been. At the water's edge, Alice stares into her reflection for a long time. She doesn't speak. But when she turns, her eyes are wet. It is there that the first test comes. A creature, tall, skeletal, cloaked in feathers and teeth, steps from the tree-lean. It does not attack. It asks, "What is your wish?" It hisses, its voice the sound of rust. Grey Alice does not answer. Boyce reaches for his blade, but she stops him with a hand. "Don't speak," she warns. "If you answer, it will take your voice." They walk past it. The creature watches, smiling. Boyce begins to understand that this journey is not across land, but through a threshold. Each encounter is a gate. Each gate, a choice. And choices echo. They cross into the Shatterwind Pass, a place where the rocks are carved with the names of the dead. There, they meet a man who remembers Grey Alice from another time. He claims she saved his daughter decades ago. But the way he says it is laced with guilt, as if salvation came at the cost of something far worse. He gives them shelter, feeds them, and then, in the middle of the night, burns down his own home. He leaves behind a note. "I remember now what you took." Boyce begins to question her. He asks what the stories mean, what she really does. She answers only this, "I give people what they want, even when they don't understand what they've asked for." As they descend into the lowlands, the world begins to decay. Not rot, not ruin. Something more subtle. Colors drain from the sky. The wind stops moving. Even time seems to slow. They pass through a field of statues, humans frozen in expressions of awe or terror. Boyce sees one that looks like a child. He tries to cover its eyes. Alice stops him. "It's not a child," she says. It's a warning. And then, finally, they reach the edge. The true border of the Lost Lands. A canyon, wide as a wound, filled with mist and echo. To cross it is to leave behind not just the known world, but memory, certainty, even identity. Gray Alice kneels, draws a circle in the dust, and begins the ritual. But something interrupts Hera's sound. A whisper. A name. Her name. Spoken from across the canyon. She freezes. Boyce watches as something in her shifts. For the first time he sees fear. Real, unguarded, primal fear. She doesn't finish the ritual. Instead, she stands, turns, and begins walking toward the voice. He follows. And the air grows colder. The landscape changes. No longer natural. Carved. Constructed. And there, beneath a sky that swirls like smoke, they find it. A door. Ancient. Sealed. Covered in symbols that pulse when Alice approaches. She places her hand against it. It opens. And they step through. Not into a chamber, but into a memory. Her memory. Of a time before the stories. Before the wishes. Before the power. They see her as a girl. Alone. Afraid. Calling out to a world that never answered, until it did. And the thing that answered didn't come with love. It came with rules. Everything has a cost. The memory shatters. They're back at the canyon's edge. But now the door is gone. And the Lost Lands are awake. Watching. Waiting. And no one, not even Gray Alice, knows what's coming next. It feels different now. The world they walk through isn't merely distant. It's rearranged. The air is heavier, as if filled with breath that doesn't belong to them. The soil is dark beneath their boots, spongy like something half alive. The silence, which had always hovered like a veil, now vibrates with a presence. The Lost Lands are no longer hiding. They've opened. And Gray Alice knows, without needing to say it, that there's no turning back. Boyce walks behind her, quieter than before, eyes catching every flicker of shadow. He no longer doubts that this place is watching them. The trees seem to shift when they're not looking. Stones appear in different arrangements. Sometimes the wind whispers his name, not maliciously, but intimately, like a memory wearing his mother's voice. They pass through a broken archway that once belonged to a temple now reduced to rubble and moss. Beneath it, the air shimmers and time bends. Day becomes dusk without warning. Insects hum backwards. Their own shadows begin to lag behind them, like echoes that haven't decided to follow yet. And then they see it, etched into the face of a mountain, towering and terrible, the sigil of the Queen. Alice stops. "This wasn't here before," she says, her voice tight. But Boyce says nothing, because deep down he knows. The Queen is already here. The trail leads them to a vale that dips into mist. They descend, and there, gathered in a ring, are figures cloaked in bone-white robes. They do not move. They do not speak. But they part when Alice steps forward. At the center is a flame suspended in mid-air, and beside it, standing like a statue carved from vengeance, is the Queen herself. She does not greet them. She simply says, "I found the heart." And Alice, eyes wide for the first time, whispers, "You weren't meant to come this far." The Queen smiles. "But I have." What follows is not a confrontation of words, but of truth. The Queen reveals what she never told them. She never sought to become a dragon. She sought to unmake them. The old bloodlines, the ancient mythologies, the powers hoarded by women like Gray Alice, she wants to sever them. To rewrite the world. To end the cycle of wish and consequence and build something cleaner. Boyce watches the two women circle each other, one forged by fire and shadow, the other by steel and ambition, and understands he's never really been part of this story. He was just the witness. But he also knows that witnesses have choices. The Queen presents the flame to Alice. The seed of ending, she calls it. One spell to erase it all. You were supposed to cast it. But if you won't, I will. But Alice doesn't move. Instead, she turns to Boyce and asks, "What would you wish for?" He doesn't answer, because he knows now that to answer is to wish, and wishes have teeth. The flame pulses. Alice steps toward it, and then the world fractures. Reality splits open with a roar of silence, and they're no longer in the veil but suspended between worlds. The sky is an open eye. The stars swirl like whispers, and below them is a sea made of every choice Alice has ever made. Faces, hands, moments, rising and falling like tides. They are in the between, where magic was born, where endings begin. The Queen tries to wield the flame, but the between does not recognize her. It resists, and so she turns to Boyce. "You carry no magic," she says. "That makes you pure." She offers him the flame. He steps forward, but before he touches it, he turns to Alice, and he asks her a question. "Is this what you want?" Alice closes her eyes, and for the first time truly hesitates, because the truth is, she doesn't know. She has spent so long granting wishes, carrying burdens, unraveling the lives of others, that she has never considered what she would want for herself. She thought she was above it, beyond desire. But now, she wants something simple. Peace. Not for the world. For herself. She steps forward, places her hand over Boyce's, and the flame responds. It doesn't burn. It sings. Not in sound, but in memory. Together, they see everything. The people Alice has helped. The ones she's hurt. The kingdoms she's saved by damning individuals. The moments where she became myth not because of power, but because of mercy. The flame asks her, without words, what she wants. And she finally answers. "I want it to end. But not with fire. With forgiveness." She releases the flame, not to destroy, but to unbind. She gives it back to the between, and the realm responds by collapsing the space between them all. A storm of light erupts. The ground reclaims the sigils. The robed figures dissolve into mist. And the Queen? She screams, because without power she is nothing. And the world, sensing her emptiness, erases her, not in death, but in forgetting. She vanishes, and the lands begin to breathe again. The skies clear, the mist lifts, and for the first time the lost lands feel free. Alice and Boyce awaken on the edge of the forest. The air is crisp. Birds sing. Time at last moves forward. He asks her what now, and she smiles. "I think I'll just walk," she says, "until I stop needing to." They part ways without ceremony. She into the wild. He into the world. Neither look back, because the story is over. Not with triumph, not with tragedy, but with choice. And in a world once ruled by wish and consequence, that is the rarest magic of all. She does not enter the world like a firebrand or a queen. She enters quietly, like a shadow taking form at the edge of dusk. There's no grand introduction, no chorus of names or fanfare of past glories. She simply steps into view and alters everything around her, not with words, not even with presence, but with absence. Grey Alice is defined as much by what she withholds as by what she reveals, and that is what makes her unforgettable. She is not warm. She is not cold. She is other, etched from something ancient and unbending, like a sword forged in loneliness and smoke. From the moment we meet her, she exists in tension, between myth and woman, between savior and cautionary tale. She wears her name like armor, and it's heavy, not from its letters but from the centuries of stories tied to it. People fear her, some worship her, but few ever understand her, and perhaps that's by design. Her past is never handed to us. We don't get a tragic monologue. We don't see a childhood montage. Instead, we get glimpses, like shards caught in a river's current. A memory in her eyes. A tremble in her hand. A hesitation before she speaks a name. Her history is not what shaped her. It's what she refuses to let define her. And in that refusal, she becomes not just a character, but a force. What makes her so riveting is her restraint. In a genre where magic wielders often explode with drama or unravel with power, Alice moves with quiet certainty. She does not cast spells with flourish. She negotiates with reality. She doesn't hurl bolts of light or summon storms. She bends the world, softly, dangerously, as if every choice is a conversation with fate itself. But beneath that calm is a wound that never closed. She has done terrible things, not because she wanted to, because she had to, or believed she did. Her magic isn't whimsical, it's transactional. She grants wishes, but they come with consequences. She doesn't punish. She delivers. And the cruelty isn't in her intent, it's in how deeply she understands that people rarely know what they're truly asking for. That's where her tragedy lives. In the space between granting a wish and knowing it will become a curse. Yet despite all this, she is not cruel. She listens. She watches. She walks alongside. And sometimes, when no one is looking, she softens. There's a moment, when Boyce asks her if she believes people can change, that she doesn't answer right away. Not because she doesn't know, but because the answer matters. Because she knows it will echo. And when she finally says, "I don't know, but I hope so," you understand that everything she's ever done has been in service to that hope, even if she pretends otherwise. Boyce, on the other hand, is not a legend. He's a man trying not to be one. A soldier without a war. A guide without faith. He follows not because he believes in the quest, but because he doesn't believe in anything else. He is the lens through which we see Alice. His doubt becomes our doubt. His silence our unease. He watches her not with awe, but with suspicion, and it's that grounded perspective that allows us to trust him. He doesn't want magic. He doesn't crave power. He wants truth. And slowly, he begins to see that truth lives not in the world around them, but in the people who've been broken by it. In the villagers who vanish. In the ruins that whisper. In the way Alice breathes when no one's watching. Boyce is the anchor, not to plot, but to emotion. He gives shape to the story's weight. Their relationship never erupts into romance. It doesn't need to. It is intimacy without possession. Trust without certainty. Two people who learn, step by step, not how to save each other, but how to stand beside each other. That is rarer. And then there's the Queen. She enters like a monarch and exits like a myth. Her presence is regal, commanding, unmistakable, but what makes her fascinating isn't her power. It's her desperation. She wants to save her kingdom, yes. But more than that, she wants to matter. She wants to rewrite the rules. She's tired of playing within systems built by men, by sorcerers, by old gods. She wants to burn it all down and start again, with herself at the center. She sees Alice as a tool, a key, a doorway. And that's her mistake, because she misunderstands the nature of power. She believes it can be contained, owned, wielded. She doesn't understand that power, in this world, is borrowed, and every debt must be paid. Her arc is tragic not because she fails, but because she gets exactly what she asked for. And that, as Alice knows all too well, is the most dangerous outcome of all. The Queen is not a villain in the classic sense. She is not wicked or insane. She is human. She wants legacy. She wants to change the world. But her vision is tunneled. Her ambition unchecked. And when that kind of will meets ancient magic, the result is never peace. It's reckoning. Even the land has a role to play. It isn't passive. It responds to desire, to pain, to memory. It shifts and molds, reflecting the inner worlds of those who walk it. The Lost Lands are not just a setting, they are an extension of Alice herself. Her regrets, her power, her past, every echoing footstep, every altered path, every whisper of a name long buried, they belong to her. She doesn't walk through the Lost Lands. She is the Lost Lands. And so, every character that steps into that space is stepping into her history, her burden, her truth. The creatures they encounter are not monsters. They are metaphors. The mirror lake? A confrontation with choice. The bone-covered sentries? The weight of consequence. The flame at the center of the between? The final question. Will you destroy what you are to protect what could be? Even the silence in the film speaks. It speaks of sorrow, of restraint, of a world that once burned bright but now simmers in ash and waiting. Each character is haunted, not by ghosts, but by decisions. What this story does so masterfully is refuse to let anyone escape themselves. Alice cannot outrun her past. Boyce cannot remain a bystander. The Queen cannot control what she never understood. And the land cannot stay lost forever. In the end, it's not magic that changes them. It's understanding. Alice, for all her power, chooses peace. Boyce, for all his armor, chooses vulnerability. And the Queen, in all her fire, is extinguished not by force, but by forgetting. These characters are not symbols. They are possibilities. Reflections of what we become when faced with power we don't deserve, or truths we don't want to carry. And in the quiet aftermath, as the land exhales and time begins again, you're left not with a legend, but with a lingering feeling. That somewhere out there, a woman walks alone. Not feared, not followed, just free. And in her wake, stories bloom. Not of heroes, but of those who finally understood what it means to choose. It started long before the first slate clapped, before casting, before the script was finalized, before the studio even greenlit the project. It started with a dream, one the director had during a fever. A forest, cloaked in mist. A woman, cloaked in leather. A flame suspended in mid-air. The dream felt ancient, not in subject matter, but in tone, like something remembered from a past life. He woke drenched in sweat and wrote the words, "There are places older than memory, and she walks through them." That single sentence became the heartbeat of the film. And from the moment pre-production began, nothing about the process felt normal. The story, dense with mythic resonance and narrative ambiguity, attracted a team of artists and creators who weren't just making a film. They were stepping into a kind of ritual. That's how the lead production designer described it, at least. "We didn't build a world," she said. "We entered one." The first sign that things were going to be strange came during location scouting. The crew traveled to several countries in search of a landscape that felt untouched, mythic, forgotten. They found it in the Carpathian Mountains, in a stretch of dense wilderness that locals rarely ventured into. The area had no formal name on any map, just coordinates. And yet, when the location scout arrived, they found an old wooden sign nailed to a tree. "No wishes here." They laughed, took a photo, but no one removed the sign. Once filming began, the oddities escalated. The weather refused to cooperate, not in ways that delayed filming, but in ways that seemed intentional. Rain would start just as the camera rolled, drenching the set in mist that made every shot ethereal. Wind would rise on cue, pushing cloaks and branches at just the right moment. A storm cleared the exact minute the final take of a scene wrapped. Even the lead actress admitted it felt like the world was in on the story, like it wanted to be told. The director made an unconventional choice. He banned mirrors from the set. Not for vanity. Not for superstition. He claimed they interfered with the energy of the space. The cinematographer backed him up. So instead of reflective surfaces, they used blackened obsidian, matte glass, or shadows. Interestingly, the few scenes in which mirrors were absolutely required were filmed under extreme conditions. Mostly at night, mostly on film stock that hadn't been used since the early 2000s. And in more than one of those takes, the crew later claimed that the reflections showed things that weren't in the room. A figure. A second shadow. A flicker of movement. The footage was reviewed and declared inconclusive, but the raw reels were sealed and never shown again. One of the most talked-about moments happened while filming the canyon scene, when Alice and Boyce approached the edge of the Lost Lands. It was a steep, dangerous location, with real cliffs and minimal safety harnesses. During one take, the wind picked up suddenly and a fog rolled in so thick that visibility dropped to less than 3 feet. The crew panicked. But the camera kept rolling. And in that fog, the actors improvised an entire scene. Alice whispered a line not in the script, "It's listening." Boyce responded, "Then stop breathing so loud." It broke the tension. Everyone laughed. The fog lifted. The sun broke through. That improvised exchange made the final cut. Another strange element. The extras. For one sequence, they needed a crowd of silent-robed figures. Standard stuff. But the casting call attracted a bizarre group of applicants. No agents. No resumes. Just people who heard about it and showed up dressed for the part. The costume designer recalled, some of them didn't even need fittings. They looked like they'd stepped out of the story. One extra in particular, a tall, pale man with silver eyes, delivered a look so unsettling during a background shot that it made the director uncomfortable. When they went to find him afterward to sign release paperwork, he was gone. No one remembered him arriving. No one saw him leave. And his face? Unmistakable in the film. But no one has ever identified him. The lead actress, whose performance as Alice has since been called a career-defining turn, spoke about strange dreams during the shoot. Recurring visions of walking through forests that didn't end, of standing before a mirror that refused to reflect, of being followed by someone who never revealed their face. She kept a dream journal. By the end of filming, she had filled 3. Oddly, the dreams stopped the moment she returned home. The editor reported an unusual phenomenon during post-production. Certain sequences would glitch during playback, not digitally, but rhythmically. A line would repeat. A cut would loop once, then correct itself. Always in scenes involving flame. Always at the same timestamp, 1:13. No cause was found. The files were clean. But the timing was preserved in the final sound mix as a subliminal beat, unheard by most, but present. The composer, meanwhile, wrote much of the score in isolation on a disused monastery estate in northern Italy. He claimed the acoustics of the stone walls helped him hear what the world was hiding. He sent back compositions that featured no traditional melody, only layered breathing, bowed metal, and slowed whispers. When asked whose voices he recorded, he said, "They weren't mine." And then there was the script. The final version had 114 pages. But several crew members swear they saw earlier drafts that were longer. Different. Whole characters missing. Entire subplots vanished. The screenwriter denies this. Claims the draft never changed significantly. But one assistant swears she printed a version in which Gray Alice fails. Another claims a sequence set in a labyrinth was removed last minute, despite location photos proving it was shot. No official explanation has ever been given. Even the film's title caused controversy. It was originally to be called The Promise Maker, but after several on-set disturbances, including a tent catching fire and a camera drone crashing into a lake, the director abruptly changed it to In the Lost Lands. The studio didn't fight him. They never even asked why. And then came the promotional campaign. Unlike most genre films, the marketing team refused to show key scenes. No dragons. No magic. No obvious plot. Trailers were abstract. Soundscapes and whispers, flashes of light, a woman walking toward a tree that bleeds. One teaser featured a single line spoken in a forgotten dialect, later translated by fans as, "Be careful what you bury." One theater chain attempted a standard press screening a week before release. The hard drive arrived, but the final 10 minutes of the film were blank. Silent. When contacted, the distributor said, "The film ends when it chooses to." They screened it again the next day, and the final 10 minutes played perfectly. No changes were made. And then there's the box buried on set. Rumor has it, on the final day of shooting, the cast and crew placed items inside. Scripts, a strip of 35mm film, sketches from the art department, a vial of lake water, a stone from the canyon, and a note written by the director that no one else was allowed to read. The box was sealed in iron and buried beneath the final shot location. Not as a time capsule. As an offering. They never marked the spot. The lead actress said only, "It knows where it is." The film premiered quietly. No red carpet. No press tour. Just a digital release and a handful of festival screenings. And yet, it caught fire. Audiences described feeling watched while viewing it. One person claimed their smart TV turned itself on during a rewatch and played the end credits unprompted. Another viewer said that when they paused the film, the screen flashed an image not in the movie, a silhouette against stars. Dozens of others described feeling strange chills during a scene that featured no sound. None of these incidents were ever explained. But they only added to the legend. Today, the film exists in a strange space. Not a blockbuster. Not a cult classic. Something in between. Like a spell whispered once and never spoken again. And those who worked on it? They've moved on. But many have spoken, quietly, about the sense that something followed them. Not haunted them. Not cursed them. Just lingered. The cinematographer now only shoots on location. The composer hasn't scored a film since. And the director? He's writing something new. In longhand. At night. In a cabin deep in the woods. And he's started dreaming again. It begins slowly. Not with spectacle or a rush of exposition, but with silence, patient and deliberate. A woman walking through a ruined gate. A crown rusting on a distant throne. A question hanging in the air like smoke. What would you give to change the world? From the first frame, the film invites its audience not into action, but into consideration. Into weight. Into consequence. And for critics watching closely, this wasn't just a fantasy tale, it was a meditation wrapped in myth. The story's structure refuses to conform. There is no clear villain. No rise and fall arc that can be comfortably mapped. Instead, it spirals inward, each event folding in on itself like a dream with shifting walls. Critics have called this structure mythic recursion, a storytelling style less concerned with plot than with reverberation. Every action echoes. The story's structure refuses to conform. There is no clear villain. No rise and fall arc that can be comfortably mapped. Instead, it spirals inward, each event folding in on itself like a dream with shifting walls. Critics have called this structure mythic recursion, a storytelling style less concerned with plot than with reverberation. Every action echoes. Every moment carries the ghost of something older, something deeper. It's not just narrative, it's ritual. One of the earliest events that critics highlighted is the summoning of Grey Alice. Not because of its pageantry, but because of how understated it is. A queen lights a fire and speaks a name, and then waits. There's no thunder, no magical explosion, just anticipation. That moment sets the tone. Here, power doesn't shout, it listens. It waits. And that restraint, that decision to delay gratification, becomes a mirror for the film's deeper concerns. What is power, really? Who deserves it? Who survives its use? These questions aren't asked explicitly. They're explored through quiet tension, through the Queen's growing desperation, through Alice's unreadable silences, through Boyce's reluctant loyalty. Each of these characters is haunted by a different form of loss, and every choice they make becomes a referendum on how they carry it. Critically, the encounter at the Mirror Lake has been singled out again and again as one of the film's pivotal moments, not for its visual effects, which are minimal, but for its thematic depth. Alice sees herself. Or rather, she sees versions of herself. Younger, harsher, kind, cruel. Critics interpret this scene not just as a confrontation with potential futures, but as a quiet condemnation of the mythic self. Who is Grey Alice, really? A savior? A weapon? A mistake? The lake does not answer. It reflects. And in that reflection, the audience begins to understand that the film is less about the world being saved, and more about a woman confronting the weight of being used by that world. The Queen's arc, meanwhile, becomes a slow deconstruction of agency. When she first appears, she radiates authority, commanding, precise, regal. But the longer she remains on screen, the more cracks form. Her desire for transformation, at first framed as strategic, becomes a form of grief. Not grief for what she's lost, but for what she never had. Power, for her, is not a means to an end, it's the end itself. Critics have noted how the Queen isn't driven by vengeance, but by a desire for permanence. She doesn't want to defeat her enemies. She wants to become unchallengeable. And that, ultimately, is what destroys her. The Queen's decision to harness the seed of ending, a magical artifact whose ambiguity is never fully resolved, has been read by some as a metaphor for imperialism, for the temptation to rewrite the rules not for justice, but for domination. And Alice, in refusing to carry out the Queen's wish, is not just resisting a command. She is resisting complicity. That subtle rejection, quiet, powerful, absolute, becomes the film's most important act of rebellion. Then there's the between. This dreamlike space, where time loses meaning and memory becomes currency, serves as the film's surreal climax. It has drawn comparisons to the metaphysical planes in The Fountain and the psychic fractures in Annihilation. But unlike those films, The Between doesn't reveal the nature of the universe. It reveals the individual. It doesn't ask, "What is reality?" It asks, "What is left of you when you can no longer lie?" Alice's choice to give up the seed is not a sacrifice in the conventional sense. She does not die. She does not lose her magic. Instead, she does something far more difficult. She lets go. Critics have hailed this moment as revolutionary, not because of what happens, but because of what doesn't. There is no climactic explosion. No battle. Just a quiet act of refusal. In a genre built on escalation, this film offers inversion. Not more. Less. Not victory. Surrender. Not salvation. Silence. And in that silence, something extraordinary happens. The land heals. Not through spells. Through rest. The lost lands, once twisted and haunted, begin to shift. Skies clear. Grass grows. Voices return. The very world reacts to a decision made not out of ambition, but out of exhaustion. A decision to end the cycle. This resonated deeply with audiences, especially in a cultural moment saturated with narratives of domination. Here was a story about walking away, about not becoming the monster to kill the monster. Boy's role in all this has also been the subject of critical admiration. In most other versions of this tale, he would rise to action, slay the beast, save the girl. But here, his strength lies in restraint, in listening, in bearing witness. He doesn't save Alice. He doesn't try. Instead, he stands beside her, not as a protector, but as a participant. That quiet allyship, critics note, reframes masculinity in genre storytelling. He is not sidelined. He is not emasculated. He is present. That is enough. Thematically, the film explores dualities, intimacy and distance, magic and cost, desire and corruption. But its deepest theme, the one that threads through every scene like smoke through a temple, is remembrance. What we choose to remember, what we must forget, and what the world does with the pieces we leave behind. Alice, at her core, is a vessel of memory. Of others. Of herself. Of worlds undone. Her silence is not emptiness, it is weight. And as she walks away in the film's final frame, alone again, there is no closure. No promise that peace will last. Just a moment. A breath. And the sense that perhaps, just this once, a story chose to end without asking for more. Reception to this ending was polarizing, as great endings often are. Some viewers found it frustrating. They wanted resolution. They wanted judgment. They wanted a clearer shape to the myth. But others saw the ambiguity not as weakness, but as invitation. The film doesn't ask to be solved. It asks to be felt. And it lingers, in that way stories rooted in myth often do, not on the surface, but underneath. In the weeks following release, essays poured in. Analyses of the spiral motifs. Interpretations of the Queen's downfall as an allegory for inherited trauma. Diagrams mapping the geography of the Lost Lands as a metaphor for emotional regression. Some claimed the entire story was a projection of Alice's guilt. Others said the lands were real, and Alice was their last living memory. But one interpretation seemed to rise above the others. That the film is about the danger of certainty. Everyone, Alice, the Queen, Boyce, believes they know the path. And all are humbled by it. Even the land. Even the story itself. Critics called this a post-mythic narrative, a tale that doesn't destroy myth, but outgrows it. A tale where magic doesn't fix the world. Where choice ends the world as it was, and leaves something quieter in its place. And that is perhaps the film's greatest achievement. It doesn't feel like an answer. It feels like a door. Opening. And you, standing at its threshold. Listening. Waiting. And finally, choosing whether to step through. It wasn't supposed to feel sacred, but it did. Before a single word is spoken, before any name is given, the story opens on a stretch of wilderness so vast, so strangely quiet, that it feels less like a location and more like a memory. A valley choked in fog. A sky the color of cooled ash. Wind brushing over distant mountains as if trying not to disturb what sleeps beneath them. This isn't just the backdrop for the story, it is the story. Or perhaps the memory of one. The land is old. That's the first thing it tells you. Not just in how it looks, but in how it listens. Every stone, every crooked tree, every path swallowed by moss feels like it was once part of something larger, something that sang, bled, and then crumbled. The camera doesn't rush to show you this. It lingers. It breathes. Wide shots stretch longer than expected, giving the audience time not to observe, but to absorb. The director doesn't want you to look at the world. He wants you to enter it. And once you do, the change begins. The first setting we explore is the Queen's Citadel. Built not in gleaming towers or imperial gold, but in stone so dark it seems to drink the light. The citadel is crumbling, an empire long past its height, holding itself together with ritual and fear. It sits atop a cliff, framed by clouds, surrounded by narrow bridges and weather-beaten flags. Its architecture is stark, angular, severe. No unnecessary beauty. No comfort. This is not a place for dreams. It is a place for decisions. The kind that leave marks. Inside, everything is too still. Fires burn low in iron basins. Tapestries sag. Light leaks through narrow windows, drawing long lines across the stone floors, as if time itself is trying to escape. When Grey Alice arrives, the castle doesn't welcome her. It studies her. The shadows stretch a little longer behind her steps. The halls echo a little louder. She doesn't belong here, and the walls know it. Then we step outside. And the film exhales. The wilds. Unmapped, untamed, and unmerciful. The lost lands stretch like an ocean of forest, valley, and ruin, an ever-shifting labyrinth of ancient spaces where the known world goes to forget itself. The characters don't walk through these lands. They drift. The cinematography mirrors this, often placing them small within massive frames, as though the land is not being traversed but endured. The camera cranes up, giving us long vertical shots of winding trails and crumbling staircases hidden in cliff faces. There's something both majestic and claustrophobic about it, as though the further they go, the more the land closes around them. Color grading plays a key role in this transformation. The early scenes are rich with earthy hues, deep browns, cold grays, the faint warmth of firelight. But as the characters move deeper into the unknown, those colors drain. Greens become sickly. Blues sharpen into cold steel. The palette turns desaturated, as though the world is losing memory of what sunlight used to feel like. And just when it threatens to collapse into grayscale, a single burst of crimson, a cloak, a flower, a flame, erupts into view. Not often. Just enough to jolt the eye. Just enough to remind you that magic still breathes here. The ruins, scattered like bones across the landscape, are never explained. Not directly. They're remnants of a world the characters no longer understand. Broken columns, shattered mirrors, statues with faces eroded into blankness. These structures are filmed like ancient gods, framed low, approached slowly, surrounded by silence. There's a weight to them. A suggestion that they were not merely destroyed, but left behind. And as the journey continues, these ruins become more frequent, more complete. As if the lost lands are remembering themselves. Water is a recurring motif in these settings. Rivers that flow backwards. Lakes that don't reflect what's above them, but what's beneath. One unforgettable location is the Obsidian Lake, still, silent, ringed by white trees that creak but never fall. Here, the camera locks into place. No movement. Just reflection. The characters approach the water and see not themselves, but versions of who they might have become. It's never explained. It doesn't need to be. The setting speaks. The forest sequences are among the most atmospheric in the film. These are not lush, lively forests. These are forests that remember. Trees with bark as black as coal. Branches that hang too low, too still. The sound design in these moments is almost imperceptible. Just breath, wind, and the occasional creak of something shifting far too slowly to see. The camera tilts just slightly off balance in these scenes, subtly disorienting the viewer. Nothing overt. Just enough to feel wrong. Then there's the between. Not a place, but a breach. When Grey Alice and her companions cross into it, the world changes. Gravity thins. Colors shimmer. Structures dissolve at their edges. It's not CGI heavy. The effects are tactile. Veils of silk used to mimic waves in the air, lights refracted through crystal panels, slow motion combined with subtle motion blur. The result isn't flashy. It's haunting. Like stepping into a dream where everything looks familiar but feels utterly wrong. This section of the film is where the cinematography becomes most abstract. Faces blur as characters move. Sound dulls, then amplifies. Shadows begin to precede people, rather than follow them. These visual choices aren't just for style, they express theme. Here, the characters are untethered, not just from the world but from themselves. And the camera, always previously composed and restrained, now drifts. It spirals. It reverses. It lingers on details that no longer make sense. The design of the between features no clear geography. Just broken temples half submerged in mist. Mirrors without frames. Stones that hum when stepped upon. A sky with no horizon. The characters don't navigate it. They endure it. And the visual language ensures we do the same. There's a discomfort in the editing rhythm here. Long takes punctuated by sudden, jarring cuts. Time seems to skip forward by breaths. It makes the viewer feel off-kilter, suspended. Eventually, the land reclaims its form. Long before the first frame was captured, long before casting, the crew was told they were making something different. Something that wouldn't shout its purpose or hold the audience's hand. Something slow, strange, and ancient. A myth you could accidentally walk into, the director had said. And from that moment, the atmosphere around the production began to shift, not outwardly, but inwardly. The project became a pilgrimage. The first major choice was the location. The script called for a world unscarred by modern architecture, places that felt like time forgot them. So the production team began their journey not in a studio, but deep into wilderness. They considered Iceland's jagged basalt cliffs, New Zealand's highlands, the deserts of Namibia. But none of them felt quite right. Too majestic, too familiar. What they needed wasn't beauty. It was mystery. They found it in a stretch of land near the border of Albania and Montenegro. A high, forested plateau wrapped in mist and cut through by narrow canyons. The locals called it the Whispering Fold. Not an official name, just something passed down. Supposedly, if you slept there, the trees would talk to you in your dreams. Naturally, they picked that spot. Once the site was secured, the crew was moved in, not to nearby hotels, but to the land itself. Portable cabins. Tents. Shared fires. They built their own small world, ringed by fog and superstition. For 3 months, no one commuted. They lived on set. Ate together. Slept under the same canopy of stars. And that closeness seeped into the work. It made the entire shoot feel less like a job and more like a shared hallucination. One of the first sequences shot was the arrival of Grey Alice to the Queen's citadel. Instead of green screens or artificial backdrops, the production designer constructed a real structure from salvaged stone and driftwood, half-finished, intentionally crooked, weathered like it had stood for 1,000 years. No one was allowed to walk through it unless it was for a take. "Let the walls stay hungry," the director said. That wasn't just poetry. It was process. Every location was treated like a living being. Before filming in the canyon where Alice and Boyce first glimpsed the Lost Lands, the crew performed a quiet ceremony. Not religious. Just respectful. A moment of silence. A bowl of water left near the stones. An offering, one grip called it, in case the land doesn't like being looked at. The actors were pulled into this atmosphere immediately. The actress playing Grey Alice wasn't given a traditional script. Instead, she was handed a bound book, thick with handwritten pages, sketches, poems, and fragments of folklore. The director called it her map. It contained no instructions, only prompts. What do you feel when you hold someone's secret? What does regret taste like? These were her cues. She took to it completely. Rarely broke character. Would walk alone through the forest for hours, barefoot, between takes. One night, during a full moon, she stood by the lake and spoke a monologue in an invented language. No cameras were rolling. Just her, the night, and a few crew members who stumbled upon her by accident. She later claimed she didn't remember doing it. Boyce's actor, on the other hand, kept a small journal of field notes. Every day he wrote down his impressions of Alice, not as the actress, but as the character. At night, he'd sit by the fire and read them aloud. Lines like, "She carries silence like a knife," and "I think she's already walked through this moment once." None of it was scripted. But the intimacy bled into their performances. Filming was not without challenges. Weather was unpredictable. Gear froze. Roads vanished in mudslides. One dolly track had to be built 3 times in a single day. During a night shoot, a storm knocked out all lighting. Instead of halting production, they lit the scene with torches, mirrors, and moonlight. It ended up being one of the most visually haunting moments in the film. In another scene, Boyce enters a temple ruin. The original plan was to build a partial set. But on a scouting walk, the director discovered a cave, completely untouched, flooded with shafts of natural light. They filmed there instead. During one take, a bat swooped past the actor's head, perfectly timed with a dramatic beat. It wasn't planned. But they used it. The costume team also approached their work like archaeologists. Every piece of clothing was made by hand, using traditional techniques: woven linen, aged leather, naturally dyed fabrics. Alice's cloak was stitched with fragments of embroidered symbols, most of which were based on real-world mythology. None of them are explained in the film. They're just there, waiting to be discovered. Even props were crafted with hidden layers. The Seed of Ending, that luminous orb of power that tempts the Queen, was built from blown glass, filled with salt crystals, and rigged with an internal light source that flickered based on ambient temperature. It never looked the same twice. On particularly cold days, it glowed deep blue. On warmer ones, it pulsed with orange. No post-production needed. The sound design also took unexpected turns. Rather than layering traditional orchestral scores, the composer recorded ambient field noises: branches snapping, footsteps, breath. He slowed them down, distorted them, and built a sonic texture that underlined the film's emotional current. The most eerie track in the film, the one used when Alice steps into the Between, was composed entirely from reversed recordings of her own voice. Some scenes were captured in a single take, not because it was planned, but because the actors fell so deeply into rhythm that cutting felt sacrilegious. One such moment came during the confrontation in the flame chamber. The scene was supposed to end with a heated exchange. But instead, the 2 actresses locked eyes and fell into an unscripted silence. The camera held. And something passed between them. Something so honest, so uncomfortable, that the crew barely breathed. That take became the final cut. After hours, the crew shared stories. No cell reception. No distractions. Just the fire, the mist, and each other. One night, the lead camera operator admitted he felt watched during every take in the valley. Not by drones or birds. By the land. It wasn't threatening, he said. But it didn't want to be ignored. On the final day of shooting, no one called, "That's a wrap." The last scene, a wide shot of Alice walking into the horizon, was captured in silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The camera rolled long after she was gone from the frame. Eventually, the director said, "That's it." And just like that, it was over. But even in post-production, the strange synchronicities continued. Editors reported that certain sequences fell into place too easily, like puzzle pieces remembering their shape. One assistant editor discovered that the runtime of the film, 2 hours, 22 minutes, exactly matched a line scrawled in Alice's script book: "When the truth is seen clearly, it will take 2:22 to pass." Coincidence? Maybe. But no one changed the cut. The film's release was subdued. The studio didn't push for a massive campaign. They let it whisper. And it worked. Because this wasn't a film built for noise. It was a dream that hundreds of people walked into together. And somewhere, buried in a forest no map records, is the Citadel's crumbled gate. Still there. Still watching. Just in case someone else comes looking for magic. The last act brings us to the flame chamber, a hollowed-out dome built into the belly of a mountain. The structure is unlike anything else in the film. Smooth. Polished. Ancient, but untouched. It radiates power. And here, the cinematography becomes reverent. Every angle is symmetrical. Every shot perfectly centered. It's the only place in the film that feels stable. And that stability is unnerving. This chamber is where the final decisions are made. And the world watches in silence. Afterward, when the flame is extinguished and the magic released, the camera steps back. The shots widen. The colors return, not vibrant, but present. Grass grows. Sky clears. The sound of birdsong returns, quiet but clear. And the final frames of the film are soft, open, generous. The land has healed. Not entirely. Not perfectly. But enough. It's worth noting that throughout the film, the setting is never treated as a canvas. It is never passive. It responds. It shifts. It reflects. When a character lies, the air seems to thicken. When truth is spoken, the light changes. When someone dies, the trees groan. The film uses its setting the way a poet uses metaphor, rarely direct, always deliberate. Every ruin, every fog bank, every slant of shadow says something. Not just about the world, but about the people in it. And this is where the genius lies. Because the Lost Lands are not just ancient terrain or magical obscurity. They are a mirror. Of longing. Of consequence. Of forgotten truths waiting to be remembered. And through cinematography that listens more than it shouts, through compositions that respect the quiet, through a visual language built not to impress but to immerse, the film delivers something rare. A place that doesn't ask to be understood. Only entered. Only felt. And when the screen goes dark and the credits rise, that place stays with you. Not because of what it looked like, but because of how it made you feel. Like you had walked through a story written into the bones of the world. And the land had whispered your name as you passed. It always starts the same way, doesn't it? With an idea too strange to explain, too bold to pitch in a single sentence. And yet somehow, it finds its way from one person's imagination to a table surrounded by creatives staring at maps of places that don't exist, tracing the contours of emotions not yet captured, building a world from scratch, brick by brick, breath by breath. The making of In the Lost Lands was never just a production. It was an act of conjuring. From the moment the cast and crew arrived at the remote shooting location, an isolated region flanked by mountains and drowned in fog, something changed in the way they carried themselves. There was no cell reception. No signal towers. No bars of distraction. The only things humming were insects and the quiet shuffle of feet on moss. It didn't feel like we were working on a film, the director would later say. It felt like we had crossed into something. And the land had rules. Those rules weren't written, but they were felt. It began with the silence. The location, surrounded by dense forests and cliffs wrapped in constant low mist, created a natural reverb that swallowed up voices and footsteps. The sound team remarked early on that it was the quietest location they'd ever worked in. There was no ambient city hum, no planes overhead. Just the wind and the occasional creak of the trees. At first it was eerie. Later it became part of the rhythm. The first week was filled with adjustments. The crew had to learn to operate generators on unstable terrain. Costumes had to be sewn and repaired by hand because transporting new materials became impossible once the rain started. The rain, in particular, became its own character, arriving without warning, disappearing just as suddenly. The actors got used to filming in damp clothes, mud-caked boots, and hair forever tangled by wind. And yet, no one complained. Because something about the place demanded reverence. Gray Alice's actress took that to heart. She requested no trailers, no separate accommodations. Instead, she slept in the tent constructed for her character during the film. She rose with the sun, ate with the crew, walked the terrain barefoot when she wasn't on camera. Not as a method choice, but as a kind of surrender. I needed the land to let me in, she explained. so I let go of anything that might keep me separate. One morning, she went missing for nearly 6 hours. The call time passed. The crew searched quietly, not panicked, just concerned. She returned just before dusk, eyes wide, hands dirty, holding a smooth stone she claimed she found beneath the roots of a tree. She gave it to the director and said, "I think this belongs in the chamber scene." It ended up being placed beside the seed of ending. The actor playing Boyce was her perfect counterbalance. Where she was quiet, meditative, and intuitive, he was practical, often cracking jokes between takes, helping the costume crew stitch torn fabric, even learning how to operate one of the camera rigs for a single-take sequence when the DP fell ill. Yet despite his grounded nature, even he wasn't immune to the atmosphere. "This place," he said in a behind-the-scenes interview, "makes you forget what day it is. You start dreaming in character." The cast and crew grew close fast. Isolation does that. Meals were communal. Fires were shared. There was a rotating system for who cooked dinner and who gathered wood. Evenings were filled with storytelling. Not rehearsals, just voices in the dark spinning tales. Myths. Memories. Some real. Some invented. No one kept track. The line between story and reality began to blur one night. During a break in shooting, a lighting technician brought out an old acoustic guitar. What began as a few quiet strums turned into a campfire chorus, with half the crew joining in to sing an improvised ballad about the seed of ending. Someone recorded it. The melody, soft, eerie, unresolved, was later used as the musical cue in the scene where the seed is first revealed. The production wasn't without its tests. During the second week, a storm washed out the main trail leading to the base camp. Trucks couldn't reach the set. Equipment had to be carried by hand across slick ridges and slippery footpaths. Filming was delayed for 3 days. Instead of frustration, the crew used the time to build. They reinforced tents, created new walkways. The props department whittled sticks into totems. Someone carved a sigil into a boulder near the dining area. It was never part of the set, but the camera operators swore it made it into one of the wide shots. There were animals, too. Deer that wandered into frame and refused to leave. Crows that nested in the rafters of the fake Citadel Tower. A fox that followed the actress playing Alice for 2 days, trailing her silently from a distance. She named it Echo. It disappeared the morning they shot the scene where Alice walks away at the end. She never saw it again. The challenges were many, but the strangest moments were always the quietest. The moments no one could explain. Like the day the fog didn't rise until they began shooting, and then lifted in perfect time with a character's movement. Or the moment during a night shoot when all the lanterns flickered simultaneously, though no one touched the generators. Or the final take of the canyon scene, where the wind howled so fiercely through the crevices that the dialogue was almost inaudible. Yet somehow, in post, the audio was crisp, untouched by distortion. Post-production brought its own oddities. The editor noticed recurring shapes in the footage, triangular shadows that weren't present in the raw files. The colorist had to adjust tones repeatedly, because the footage kept shifting toward blue, no matter how it was graded. "It's like the film had a memory," she joked. It kept trying to become what it remembered. The score was built from the sounds captured on set: rocks tumbling, branches snapping, footsteps through wet leaves. Every musical cue was anchored in reality. The composer even layered in distant thunder recorded during a storm on the 3rd week. That thunder now underpins the scene where the Queen first touches the flame. By the time the film wrapped, the cast and crew had been in the forest for nearly 80 days. No one wanted to leave. There was no final party. No grand send-off. Just a shared fire. A bottle passed around. Each person offered something: a line, a thought, a memory. The director, normally composed, simply whispered, "Thank you for keeping this alive." And then, quietly, they packed up and left. The set was not dismantled. It was left to the elements. The citadel, still standing in fragments. The totems, still circling the path. The sigil on the boulder, slowly fading beneath the moss. A few months later, someone returned. A production assistant with a camera, hoping to capture some behind-the-scenes B-roll of the now empty location. But the fog never lifted. He waited for hours. Eventually, he turned back. And later, when he checked his footage, he found something strange. A shot, taken from the path, looking down toward the camp. And there, in the mist, a figure. Cloaked. Still. Facing away. He swore no one was there. But then again, in the Lost Lands, nothing was ever just what it seemed. And some stories, it seems, don't end with credits. They keep walking. It's a world of shadows and quiet certainties. A landscape where time folds in on itself and memory lingers like fog, clinging to stone and skin alike. At first glance, the story seems familiar. A journey through wilderness, a confrontation with power, a reckoning between destiny and choice. But beneath that, beneath every footstep in the forest and every flicker of flame, lives something older. Something felt. Because this isn't just a story about magic. It's a story about meaning. And every moment pulses with it. At its core, the film is about the cost of desire. Not the innocent kind, the wish for someone you love kind. The deeper, darker kind. The desire to rewrite your life. To unmake the past. To reach beyond your place in the world and touch something eternal. That desire lives in every character. In the Queen, who seeks power to secure her legacy. In Boyce, who follows the path not for glory, but because he doesn't know who he is without one. And most of all, in Grey Alice, who has spent her life offering others what they think they want, only to watch them break beneath the weight of their own wishes. Desire, in this film, is never portrayed as evil. But it is dangerous. And the danger doesn't lie in the wanting. It lies in the not knowing why you want it. Over and over, characters are faced with the question, what do you truly want? And are you willing to live with what that answer demands? That question becomes a theme unto itself. But it's echoed in the land. Because the Lost Lands are not just a place, they are a metaphor. They represent everything we bury, our regrets, our ambitions, the truths we avoid. The terrain shifts, not just physically, but emotionally. Forests darken when lies are spoken. Stones crumble under the weight of fear. Even the sky changes color based on what's been revealed. Symbolism drips from every corner. The river they cross early on, the one that never shows a reflection, mirrors the idea that truth can be elusive, especially when it hides in ourselves. When Alice steps to the edge and looks down, she sees not herself, but someone else entirely. A version of her that never made the choices she did. It's not magic. It's metaphor. A haunting reminder that identity isn't fixed. It's chosen, over and over, in silence and in shadow. Then there's the seed of ending. A glowing, pulsing sphere hidden beneath the mountain, said to hold the power to end the old world and begin a new one. But it never glows the same way twice. And no one who looks at it sees the same thing. The Queen sees a throne that cannot be challenged. Boyce sees a second chance. Alice? She sees silence. Not peace. Not resolution. Just the stillness that comes when everything else has fallen away. The seed doesn't represent power. It represents temptation. The temptation to simplify life. To erase the past. To start over without consequence. But the film is clear. There is no such thing as beginning without ending. The Queen's arc is the clearest illustration of corrupted desire. She wants control. Over her kingdom. Over her legacy. Over the narrative of her life. But what she cannot accept is the fundamental truth of the world she lives in, that control, true control, is an illusion. Her quest for transformation, framed at first as empowerment, becomes a form of erasure. She doesn't want to become a dragon. She wants to end them, to destroy everything that challenges her reign. And in doing so, she reveals the film's second major theme, the tension between creation and destruction. Every character in the film creates something. A map, a story, a version of themselves. But every act of creation requires the death of something else. A version of the past, a truth long hidden, a piece of yourself. And so the film becomes a meditation on the balance between these two forces, how the desire to make something new is always haunted by the ghost of what was. Grey Alice carries this balance more than anyone. She isn't a villain. She isn't a hero. She is the embodiment of choice, of consequence. She doesn't punish. She simply delivers. And the choices she makes aren't about good or evil. They're about weight. What can be carried? What must be let go? Her silence is symbolic not of detachment, but of discipline. She has seen too much to speak casually. Her every word is a thread. Pull it wrong, and the tapestry unravels. The spiral is the film's most potent recurring symbol. It's carved into stone, etched into the Queen's chamber, hidden in the folds of Alice's cloak. A shape with no beginning, no end. A path that loops in on itself again and again. It represents many things: repetition, memory, the trap of unlearned lessons. But it also offers hope, because a spiral is not a circle. It moves inward. It deepens. And through that deepening, understanding becomes possible. When Alice stands in the chamber of the seed, surrounded by that spiral, she is given a choice. And in that moment, she doesn't choose victory or vengeance. She chooses release. The release of control. The release of expectation. And the release of herself from the cycle she's lived in for too long. That's where the film finds its most powerful theme: surrender. Not as weakness, but as liberation. Surrender is what allows Boyce to stop carrying the guilt of a war he never believed in. It's what allows Alice to walk away without looking back. It's what the Queen fails to embrace, clinging so tightly to her fear of insignificance that she disappears into it. Even the cinematography plays into this symbolism. The world becomes clearer not when characters fight for clarity, but when they stop, when they listen, when they see. The camera widens. The light softens. The noise fades. The land, once hostile, becomes quiet. The fog lifts, not with magic, but with acceptance. Nature itself becomes a silent participant in these themes. The trees, scarred and ancient, whisper secrets the characters aren't ready to hear. The wind carries fragments of lost voices. The animals watch, always just out of frame. There's a suggestion that everything in this world is alive, but not in the way we understand. It's not a fantasy realm with talking beasts. It's a world where the emotional weight of every choice echoes into the landscape, where the earth feels what the heart won't say. One moment in particular captures this perfectly. Alice and Boyce arrive at a clearing, completely empty. No ruins. No symbols. Just silence. And yet both fall to their knees. Not in worship. In recognition. They don't say what the place is. But you feel it. A graveyard of forgotten truths. A space where the past has gathered to rest. The camera doesn't move. It just holds. Long enough for the viewer to feel something shift. To remember something they never lived. In the end, the film doesn't preach. It doesn't point to its meanings with neon arrows. It trusts the viewer to feel their way through it. To get lost. To question. To wander. And in doing so, it becomes more than a story. It becomes a mirror. Not of who we are, but of who we might become if we choose to listen. To stop. To surrender. To walk into the lost places of ourselves. And find, not destruction, but transformation. Quiet, unflinching, and finally, free. It starts with a flicker, not of light, but of intention. Before the first image lands on the screen, before the first word is spoken, you can feel it. This is a film that doesn't want to impress you. It wants to invite you into something slower, stranger, heavier. The filmmaking techniques used here don't call attention to themselves. They don't announce. They breathe. And what emerges from that breath is an experience not built on spectacle, but on surrender. From the beginning, the director made one decision that would shape everything that followed: no artificial momentum. That meant no forced cuts. No action dictated by editing tricks. No musical swells that told you what to feel. The camera would not chase the characters. It would observe them, like a silent companion. Sometimes close, sometimes distant, but always still. The goal wasn't to mimic reality. It was to unearth it. Let the moments speak. Let silence stretch. Let glances linger until they became questions. To achieve this, the cinematography became an act of quiet choreography. The director of photography, known for his work on minimalist arthouse films, chose to shoot the majority of the film using wide lenses with minimal movement. Instead of tracking shots, they favored locked-off frames. The result? A kind of dreamlike stillness, where the world seems to press inward, and the characters have nowhere to hide. Every flicker of emotion becomes monumental when the frame doesn't flinch. Lighting, too, followed this philosophy. There were no artificial flares. No heavy gels or saturated filters. The film was lit almost entirely using natural light or practical sources. Candles, torches, the occasional reflected beam of moonlight off water. Interiors were allowed to remain dark, shadowed. Faces often glowed from one side and vanished into black on the other. The idea was to keep the world half-lit, half-known. Just like the story itself. During day shoots, the team relied heavily on overcast skies and diffused light, waiting, sometimes for hours, until the light was tired enough, as the gaffer joked, to match the mood. On multiple occasions, scenes were rewritten or reblocked because the sun broke through too brightly. Not because of continuity, but because clarity, in this story, was the enemy of truth. Editing was done with a reverence for rhythm over pace. Instead of traditional story beats, the editor worked from what he called emotional transitions. He cut not on action, but on feeling. A line would land, and the cut wouldn't come until the viewer had processed it. Or, more often, it would come before the line ended, slipping you into another scene mid-thought, as though the story was remembering itself rather than unfolding in real time. There's a particular cut early in the film, where Alice walks toward a ruined archway in complete silence. We never see her cross it. The scene simply shifts. She is through it now, on the other side. And what remains is a still shot of the empty archway. Wind moving through. The absence of her presence is the point. The cut itself says something. About passage. About transformation. About what must be left behind to move forward. Sound design played a critical role in deepening the film's atmosphere. Where most films layer sound to fill space, this one stripped it back. There is almost no score in the first 40 minutes. No guiding strings. No swells of emotion. Instead, the world hums. Footsteps on wet stone. Leaves brushing against skin. The faint, constant whisper of wind, recorded not in a booth, but in the actual forests where they filmed. Even dialogue was recorded using lav mics hidden under layers of costume, to preserve intimacy and texture. You don't hear the actors. You're near them later. When music does emerge, it doesn't announce itself. It seeps in. Built from unconventional instruments, bone flutes, bowed metal, detuned piano, and choral voices singing in no language, it feels less like music and more like memory. The composer described it as scoring the breath between choices. Every note is a ghost. Every sound a ripple. The film's soundscape was layered using a technique the team called echo weaving. Dialogue from one scene would sometimes appear, faintly, beneath another. A line whispered in the beginning might return, distorted, in a forest scene much later. Most viewers never consciously hear it, but they feel it, like déjà vu, like a story folding in on itself. Visual effects were used sparingly, and when they were, they obeyed the same principle, invisibility. The most striking example is the seed of ending. It glows. It pulses. But not with light created in post. It was crafted practically, with layers of glass, mineral oil, and internal lighting rigged to react to ambient temperature. VFX enhanced it only when necessary, adding subtle distortions in the air around it, as if reality didn't quite know how to wrap itself around such a thing. The Between, arguably the film's most fantastical setting, was created using a combination of in-camera tricks and minimalist digital augmentation. Real silk veils hung across sets, lit from behind with moving lights to create the illusion of motion. The actors walked through narrow corridors with mirrored floors, surrounded by fog, while the camera rotated slowly on a gimbal to simulate the loss of gravity. In post, slight warping effects were added.